Hi, everybody. So, first of all, welcome to our panel, First Bites and Eternal Kisses, How to Write LGBTQIA+, Romance and Sex in Games. Gaming Live, presented by Ally and the Community Zone, is sponsored by Devolver Digital. Huge thank you to both of them for supporting us and making this happen. As I think I said, I'm Suha Alsam-Carey. I'm going to be our moderator. My pronouns are she, her, and at First Bite, I am officially our head counsel, but I do writing, directing, voiceover, and then also I produce. If you guys want to go ahead, let me see. Why don't we start with D?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So yes, I am Danny D. I typically go by D, and my pronouns are she, they, also they, them. I would say that I am the founder of a very, very small studio called Split Fate Studios. And it's got a big agenda focused on all things speculative and subcultural in games that feature LGBTQ plus and POC characters at the helm. With the First Bite team, I basically focus on narrative. So I do some writing, but I also do the programming behind the scenes.
Anna, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, my name is Enna. My pronouns are they and she. I'm also a co-founder of Fiction Factory Games, where we focus on a lot of romance and LGBT representation. At First Bite Studios, I'm also one of the narrative designers, a writer. We're all the founders also for our own company, and I also help with some of the producing and a lot of PR relationships because I'm also a streamer.
That leaves Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm they, them, and I am, like the other said, I'm one of the founders. I am our community manager and I deal with all the marketing. And I'm also a narrative director and writer like the rest of the guys. I also own another game studio called Lunaris Games. We also make LGBTQ visual novels.
And I also have my own studio. I am vice president at Truant Pixel, and we do a lot of VR and narrative games as well. So since we're going to start with introductions, I'm going to toss it to Chris to answer why we made First Bite, because Chris is really the person that brought all of us together. So I'm going to let you answer this one.
More like I hounded all of you to make a vampire. Yeah, I guess the way it started was I met Suha and Enna back in 2019 at PAX West. And then I was lucky enough I can't really remember exactly how, but I think we all kind of fell in love with D on Twitter, like seeing their work.
They were interviewed on Glitch, and we all were like, this person is really cool.
It's like during the pandemic, we kind of like just had a little game dev group chat, and we became kind of like, well, I mean, for me, you guys became like a bit of a pillar for me throughout COVID, just like very relatable. We were all working from home through the pandemic, like all working on games. And as we got closer, I just kept thinking, wow, these guys are all so talented. Like, how cool would it be if we could make a game? And honestly, like the simple answer is I just wanted to make a game about vampires.
Yeah.
I'm a really impatient person, and all of the games that I work on at my own studio are longer form games that take a really long time to make. And I wanted to work on something that would kind of be a more like of a quicker like turnaround, just because I wanted to do a shorter form game. And I just kind of put two and two together and said, we all are vampires. We all like writing horny shit. So why don't we just like smash our heads together? And yeah, it really wasn't that deep. It's just like something fun and horny, and it worked out really well. We work so well together. Like it's kind of scary how quickly we come up with stuff together. So it's really just being like super easy and effortless to make stuff with you guys. So
yeah. And when Chris came to us with that proposal, of course we had to say yes. Like there's no no in that.
None whatsoever.
I'm glad.
There's no way to say no to something like that.
Yeah.
I think none of us really anticipated that we would be here by the end of it. Like, I think in my mind it was sort of a more game jam type feeling, and then it just grew, but it's just been very natural every step of the way. So very grateful.
Yeah, and also like we didn't like you said, like we didn't expect it to become something. Like we gained so many followers on Twitter like really quickly, and I think that just proves like there is such a thirst for these kinds of games, even though that it was like in our brains something kind of, we made it selfishly, didn't we? Like we didn't make it with the intention of it becoming like really popular or anything, but we've done really well with it. So yeah, I think that just proves that people want more horny gay stuff.
Exactly. I want more horny gay stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Never
why don't
have
we? So sorry, didn't mean to talk over you. Why don't we go ahead and sort of get into it? But we'll start with the easy question. And Dee, why don't you start? But what are some romances and games that have inspired you, and even maybe us generally with this game?
Ooh, okay. So this might be a little bit dorky, but I actually really like BioWare's golden age of games. So I got really into Dragon Age. I got really into Mass Effect. And I know one of the big criticisms, and I don't necessarily disagree, is that some of the relationships can be like very kindness coinsy, where like, you sort of, you do a little special mission for them, a side mission, and then you end up having like a potential relationship. But I was really struck by the character development that you can experience, because I think that's just such a strong facet of a romance. Like, if the two characters feel like fully developed people and then they come together, I feel like that's just a pillar for me. So I was really taken by the sort of like coworker or like sort of colleague to friendship to potential romantic interest pipeline with BioWare games. And then on the indie side, I would actually say there was like an influx of Western visual novels around like maybe 2015 or so, from small indie studios. And there was one called We Know the Devil, by Worst Girl Games, that I was just like, this is so cool. The premise of it is just sort of like, I think it takes place over the course of a night, or it's just like a very sort of concentrated time period where a trio of girls come together and can kind of have like messy intimacies. And I was really inspired by that. I thought that was very, very cool.
Such a good game.
Anna or Chris, do you guys have any that you want to add to that list?
Yeah, I would like to give, besides like BioWare, I feel like was a huge pillar in my like want to make romance games. But my first experience with romance in like an actual aspect of a game is an old PlayStation game called Thousand Arms. It's a JRPG, but also has a dating element. So the main character, Mice, can date all the ladies on your team. And I was like, you can have romance like this in games? Like, I was like mind blown because I was a teenager at the time, and I was like, this is great. And then as I started to go into college, I found out about otome games and got addicted to those. And I was like, wait, there are romance games that aren't just focused around like men. Like I can date people too. And from there, it just spawned like me looking for more and more because I'm greedy AF. I want to be able to romance everybody. And then from there, it sort of started looking into indie games for more queer romances and representation there.
Chris, did you have any that have not been hit on, you think?
No, I want to give. I obviously this is an indie game, but one of the indie games that has been like wildly successful. But I really want to give Hades props because although like I feel like it perfectly encapsulated how important being thirsty for your own characters is, which is obviously something we like massively advocate for. But also the sex scenes, like despite them being incredibly simple and like literally fade to black, were so well executed. And they included like healthy polyamorous representation, which is not something we see, like especially the healthy kind. Like if we see it in games, it's going to be offensive, and unless it's an indie game. And I think they just like really proved how easy it is to represent queerness and queer sex in like a really subtle but meaningful way. Like I remember the sex scene popping up, and it was literally fade to black and just like a couple of like horny noises, and I was like blown away by it. I was like, oh, this is like, I don't know, it just like gave me like ideas for my own games, just like how effective that was. And you're not even like really affecting the narrative with like the romance or anything. It was just really simple but like super effective. And then obviously like the rest of you, it's Dragon Age was like a formative experience for me, like growing up, like the like weird choir music playing over the awkward like pants-on sex in Origins. But you could still be gay in it, so it was like cool. And then Dragon Age 2 like literally changed my life, like made me want to make games, just like. And I know there's like a lot of like controversy around giving Dragon Age 2 props for like the bisexuality, because everyone's like, oh well, they're all bisexual by default, and it's like, okay, well, I'm bisexual.
We will get to that later in the thing as well. So
that like really meant a lot to me, and I never felt like the characters were like not queer. Like they all had their own stories, and whether you romance them or not, and they all felt like queer to me. So and like being able to make out with all of them was extra fun. So yeah.
Well, piggybacking off of that, I think Hades makes a good segue. Our next question is A, why add romance to your games? But B, why is queer romance and sex so important in gaming?
I feel like why
Anna,
not
would you like
add?
to...
Yeah, sorry. I just jumped in. I was like, why not add romance to your game? I feel like it's just like it on one aspect as a game developer, if you want people to care about your characters, giving them a romance or a sex option, like makes people thirsty and horny, like we've been talking about. Like I feel most connected to those characters that have romance or that have sex in the game. Like I will never forget or forgive Solus because I was so affected by that romance, right? And I feel like it's just so great to get people really into your story and into your characters that you've lovingly created.
I also think like queer sex is like so it's always left out of stuff, like regardless, because people are scared to tackle it, or they're scared to show it, like especially when it comes to like AAA games. Like they never, in my opinion, like I can't think off the top of my head of like any AAA games who have like really done justice to like queer romance and sex, especially like in the last couple of years, like because they just can't be bothered to hire like diverse teams, they can't be bothered to do their research. And like we really do have to rely on indie games for that rep, like for the good rep. And like the short answer is that there's just not enough of it. Like we need more. So like we need more, basically. That's it. Like queer people exist, so that's
exactly
that covers it pretty much. Queer people exist.
Yeah, like in my own games at Lunaris, and obviously in First Bite, like we have a heavily implied. Well, no, it's not even implied. Like the three of the vampires, they're in a polyamorous relationship. And like at my own studio, I always make sure to include polyrap as well. Like that's like one of the things. And ace rap, like those are the things that people like really often forget when it comes to like LGBTQ romance and sex. Like people really need that rep. So yeah.
So, having covered now, okay, we're all here, we all agree romance is important. Now, how do you make it good? Like, starting from the basics, what to you makes a good character?
Someone that's messy.
Yeah.
I love villains. Give me a tortured soul or a sad person or someone that is doing bad things, and that's just interesting to me, right? Like I
Just
think
hot villains.
yeah.
Hot gay
Yeah,
villains.
hot villains.
Yeah. Like
That's
the
like our
more
speciality at
it
First
is,
Fight.
it
We
is.
love a good villain.
We love a good
Mhm.
asshole.
A bad villain.
Morally
Super true.
grey, an straight up awful guy or girl or person who is just really horny.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when you guys are creating, do you start with tropes and then expand from there? Do you start from scratch? Like, if you sit down to do this, what is your starting point?
I love archetypes for sure. Like, so I really am pretty strongly against stereotypes, but I really do like I think there's a way that you can kind of overcorrect. Like you can take a stereotype and want so badly to subvert it that it also just kind of goes in the opposite direction and ends up being really paper thin representation. So I do definitely love to go for like an archetype and then add unexpected elements to it because I feel like that's how you avoid the stereotype trap.
Do you have any favorite or least favorite archetypes?
I am not particularly strong on the really common sort of like cis male power fantasy archetype hero. There's got to be something slightly subversive going on there if I'm into it. So like, let's say, I mean, like Ilias is so wonderful. like he's just like this big, huge, powerful dude who's like extremely strong, but definitely like Laurel and Valeria have him wrapped around their pinky fingers. You know, like there's something that's like kind of inherently submissive about him without realizing it. So I don't know. I feel like even taking really common kind of basic archetypes of like the strong, powerful man, like there's so much that you can do with that if you just kind of tweak it a little bit. And I feel like Sue, you did such a great job
Thank you so
on that
much.
front. So yeah.
So when you're writing like either any kind of arc, let's say, or some piece of media, what's your goal? How do you make sure that you've written a satisfying culmination? Is it sex? Is it romance? Is it evoking a certain feeling? Like, what is the goal for you, and how do you know that you've hit it?
I feel like especially when we're doing like a short form game, like we did with First Bite, but the same can apply to like other games as well, that where like maybe romance isn't necessarily like the main point of the game, but like there's natural progression, like when you meet somebody and you get to know them and maybe you like have sex or so I feel like our goal, especially like with First Bite, was to make that like it's difficult when it's a short game, like I said, to make it feel really like natural. Like even in a game where everything is supernatural and it's all vampires and obviously stuff that doesn't exist, you still want it to like flow right. And I think just like making sure that you're establishing the characters correctly and establishing like motives and stuff, like that's like the most important thing to me. But yeah, it's I don't know, I'm not very good at explaining that kind of stuff, but
I think you're doing great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that because I'm glad that you mentioned the short form stuff because it can be very difficult. Traditionally, romance in games tends to be you got to the end, it's time to bang, you get a cutscene, you've slept together, good job. So
yeah.
Yeah,
I
very
think
much.
looking
Yeah,
beyond that it's good to hear.
yeah, like in When the Night Comes, one of my other visual novels, like it's a pretty long visual novel. Like I think it maybe takes like 10 to 15 hours to complete like one of the romance routes. But I wanted to make sure when we wrote that there were multiple, like you get into a relationship with your chosen character maybe a little bit like quicker than is natural, but it's a game at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make sure there were like multiple kind of like chances for you to have romantic moments, like have sex. Like it's not just like the one big sex scene and then the rest of the game is just you like holding hands or something. Like how many times did we go back and do like the kissing in Dragon Age Inquisition when you had the option? Like you just like want to revisit
So many
that,
times.
even though it's like the same scene every time. Like I must have kissed Dorian like 20 times, like in
Coming
one
and going.
playthrough.
Need a kiss, need a
Yeah.
kiss, need a kiss, need a
Literally,
kiss.
and it's the same. It was the same cutscene, but I didn't care. I just like wanted it to happen because in my brain it was like, yes, this is happening at this point in the story. So like I
Yeah.
think like when we're writing our visual novels, like that's something that when they're longer that you want to make sure. I just think that adds so much to the play because you want to feel like you are like experiencing, like whether you're dating or you're like already in a relationship with the character, you want like multiple points to prove that you don't just want to like kiss or hold hands once and then the game carries on as if nothing happened. Like it's important to have that continuity like throughout the story for it to feel like meaningful, especially when you're representing like queer characters as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in real life, a lot of the times, most relationships, you're not like, all right, so we had sex, goodbye,
Yeah.
I'm going to carry on. There are
You're
some
married now.
instances, yeah.
Arc complete.
Moving on to my next romance now. No, but it just reflects real life. Like other things are going to get in the way in terms of conflict and stuff like that. And it's great that you can, express that and represent that through the entirety of your game and not just be like, all right, kiss, goodbye.
Also, I just want to point out Pika. Hi, Pika. One of our favorite streamers is in the chat.
I've been
and
watching the comments and like privately.
We especially need properly written sex scenes that aren't just focused on the cishet male's pleasure or views from their gaze, and that's like, oh, absolutely. Like that's one of like the worst parts of a lot of games that have sex in. So I think we did a really I'm going to toot our own horn, but I think we did a really good job of that in First Bite, where we have 3 incredibly different characters with incredibly different sexual tastes. Like you have Laurel, who's like super kinky, like super into BDSM, like will spank you, like all the good stuff. Yes, and then Val, who's kind of like this femme, like dom, I guess, ish. And Elis, who like just wants, like maybe he just wants to come, right?
He wants a friend, but he also wants to destroy you.
He wants to ruin
you just got to get through the murder.
So like that was, I think we did that really well. Like it was really fun to like read each other's sex scenes, and like they're all so like distinctly different. And we obviously like our player character can be any pronouns. Like the player character is basically a self-insert. So we really had to take into account like to be careful with writing those scenes and make it ambiguous enough, but like still make it a proper sex scene. Like you can't be overly descriptive, but there's like a real art to it.
There is, yeah.
Speaking more generally now, how do you guys, I suppose both at First Bite and outside of it, how do we handle representation that's outside of our personal experience, whether it's other ethnicities, gender identities, and so on?
You hire a lot of people that are very diverse, or if you don't have those diverse people, you get sensitivity readers to come in and maybe not just one sensitivity reader, because one person's experience like is not going to reflect everybody else's. So hiring multiple sensitivity readers is always best. And, just making sure you have a lot of diverse eyes on your work.
We had a great sensitivity reader for our one of our friends, like looked over a lot of the scenes for us, and like not even just for like the sex and things, just like generally, and that was incredibly helpful. So like I really can't like recommend that enough for any indie devs who are writing games. Like even if you feel like you aren't writing something that you're not personally, even if you feel like you are represented like in what you're writing, I still think it's like a really good idea, because we're not a monolith, right? Like you need to queer people aren't a monolith, you need to like get other opinions as well, I think.
I want to add too that sometimes, because I know, especially as indies, consultants are not always necessarily an option. And in that case, I want to challenge you to ask yourself if this is a story that you could or should be telling. You know, it it doesn't mean that you shouldn't diversify your characters, but you need to really take a long hard look at what you're writing and say like, do I have the range to handle this even with sensitivity consults or whatever? Like that may not be a thing for you, and that's okay. You could still tell a great story without, but there are just sometimes certain issues that as relate to certain identities or experiences that you just are not going to be equipped to write outside of that. So that is also, I think, another important thing to keep in mind. You know, at First Bite, we basically all kind of wrote what we knew, so we didn't have to worry about it as much. But, you know, for me personally, if someone's going to write an Arab character, sure. If you're going to write the experience of an Arab character, you know, growing up in the US and going to the airport and stuff, I might be like, whoa,
Yeah.
maybe you're not ready for this one. But I won't go on. But suffice it to say, you know, there are sort of, in my opinion, a number of ways to handle this. Some of them involve more money, some of them involve way more. All of them should involve self reflection. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Oof. Could not have said it
Um,
better. That is incredible.
thank you. Um, since I feel like we've been going into detail with some of these, I'm gonna skip over. We were gonna talk about how to not write good romance, but I think why don't we just go ahead and move to maybe some of the unique conflicts or challenges of writing queer romance and sex specifically. We can start maybe more narratively, and then we can pull back a little bit.
My biggest, I've already said about like queer people not being a monolith, but like remember that everyone's experience is different when you're writing queer romance and sex. Like we're a community of like incredibly diverse people. We experience sexuality and relate to gender in a multitude of different ways. Whether you're writing a sex scene like purely for eroticism, or if you're using that scene to like try and convey a deeper meaning and like further your narrative, you need to keep that in mind and like act accordingly. And I feel like again, like I said earlier, like you need to respect that if your player character is like a self-insert type, that people can have different pronouns, and to just be really careful when it comes to like anatomical descriptions and approach it like as if you were doing like choreography instead of like being super descriptive. And like you can like write sex scenes without being very specific about like genitals and movement. And like that's really important because you don't know what people like you could think that you're writing a really like simple sex scene, but you could be like inadvertently writing something that like really puts the player off. Or so I just think just like taking that into consideration and being really like careful. Like obviously not everyone's going to be writing visual novels like we do, but when you are writing visual novels, we're way more reliant on like just words and the narrative than we are on in games where like you have elaborate like videos or like images and stuff. Like a lot of the time indie games have super tight budgets and we don't have the luxury, so it might be like a blank screen where you're literally just like describing the sex. So yeah, just like be thoughtful of your words basically. Like it's, you just have to remember that everybody likes different stuff. And yeah, and you can also like give options. Like I've played games and some of my games have like options to like where a character might be like this and you want to choose how you interact with that character like sexually, and that like adds another kind of like depth to sex scenes. I feel like I don't see very often, but I think is really, I don't know, I think like I would love to see more people like exploring that stuff, like actually giving the player like more agency during sex scenes to kind of craft what happens a bit. Yeah, rather than just being like, here's the sex, this is what happens, like without no input.
Yeah, and I feel like to add on to what Chris is saying too, like if you're mechanically making a game that has like sex or romance, like make sure that romance and sex scene isn't like tacky. Like we all remember like Heavy Rain, like that was so awkward to do that. Or like with, we talked about it a little bit, Dee mentioned about like the Dragon Age and the kindness aspect. Like basically I give you a gift and then you love me. Like that is very unrealistic. So if you have a mechanic that focus around, romance and sex, make sure it's doing it uniquely and creatively, but also realistically. Like we're talking about real people, and there's so many different ways we could have romance and so many different ways we can experience sex. So like reflect that in your mechanics.
Yeah, I feel like here's a good time to talk about like Laurel's route, for example, because they are explicitly kinky. They practice BDSM, and it is potentially one of the more controversial ways into sex and intimacy. And I think there's also a lot of misinformed opinion about BDSM in general. So for me personally, I have quite a bit of experience with that sort of community. I'm pretty knowledgeable about it, but I also do research. There are, I feel like the acronym in and of itself, people may not know that there are like relationships between the four letters, like BDSM. There's bondage and discipline. There's DS, which is dominance and submission, and there's SM, which is sadism and masochism, and they kind of describe a lot of different dynamics that go into something like that. And so it's one of those things where, with that in particular, for me, it's about getting to the heart of those dynamics rather than being explicit about like penetrative sex, or sort of like what genitals are involved in the acts themselves, because there's so much that's so psychologically entwined in something like that. So that I kind of would also just extend to sex and romance in general, is like there's such a psychological facet of writing intimacy. And so I feel like you can never really go wrong with trying to pinpoint what's going on there between two people.
And also just like
And
Laurel in general was just like a masterful like representation to me of that, because that's not something how I feel about them. Like, that's not something that I've ever seen in a game before. And obviously, like, I haven't played all the games, but I've played some. And like Laurel is just so unique to me, and I think that the way like watching people react to Laurel as well was just so great. Like
this is another
Honestly,
point in the column of write what you know, because had I written that scene, would have not gone over nearly as well. But yeah, I think actually, I think one very, very important thing that I want us to address is there is another sort of fraught aspect of trying to write queer romance and sex, which is basically there's a real pressure that many people have commented on, especially in our terminally online social media era, to write perfect queer characters, not only in terms of representation, but even just characters who are wholesome or pure or respectable to society at large. So I'd love to know, how do you handle it, and is this something in your mind as you're all writing kind of your various projects, both First Bite and beyond?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, like what we were saying, like queer people are not a monolith, like Chris is saying. Like everyone is so unique and so different. And like it's one of those things, like you're never gonna be able to satisfy everybody, even though you take it with the utmost care to represent ace, arrow, trans, like whatever queer romance or queer sex that you're writing. And even if you're doing it with the most care and your heart is perfectly in the right space, there's going to be a couple of people or someone that it just doesn't click for them, and that didn't speak to their representation. And I want people to know that that's okay. Like it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to understand that you're not going to be able to satisfy everybody, because everyone is so different in this community.
Yeah, you said
Beautifully
it
said.
perfectly. Like, no one queer person is the same. The thing that you obviously see these days are people getting attacked for, you know, a person, a one single person, or like a couple of people not liking the way that a character was written or the way that something was represented. And it's just, sometimes games just aren't for you and to play them. And like there's so much like scrutiny on like queer creators specifically by other queer people, and it's like it sucks to see. But like on the one hand, I understand that we want representation for ourselves so badly because we've been so like starved of it, that there is that kind of like desire to pick it all apart. But like Sue has said earlier, just like write what you know, consult people, and just like be true to what you want to make. And hopefully you won't piss anyone off, because it's not nice. Like I've had like feedback before that's like really broken my heart. But at the end of the day, we're all doing like our best, like we really are. Like we just want to write queer stuff and like have people like us like feel included, because we historically have not been included.
This is kind of a.
Said,
Oh,
it's
sorry, Chris.
unhealthy to expect others to moderate your intake in most cases. Yeah.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is kind of a hot button issue in the romance sort of narrative community. I think it would be good if we addressed it real quick. What are your thoughts on player sexuality versus set sexuality, as mentioned with the Dragon Age 2 controversy? Which is to say, do you believe it's a problem? Do you go with one over the other in your stories, where there are sort of branching options, that kind of thing? Especially Chris, and in Arcade Spirits as well, where you can choose kind of who you are. Your character's a self-insert. How have you guys handled that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, because I'm pansexual, I just expect everyone to be pansexual. I know that this is like you were saying, it is a sort of a not drama, but like people are very set in what they want for sort of this romance. And for me, I just feel like putting limitations on romance is going to do a disservice in the long run to the people that you're trying to represent. And I understand, like, and it also depends on the type of game you're making too, right? Like, that's a huge aspect to whether your characters are going to have a set sexuality or everyone's going to be player sexual. But for me, like I said, I'm greedy. I like to romance everybody, so I want that option in my games because I don't want to like miss out on anything, and that's really important. And as pan, and I just want to have to be. I don't want to be locked out of a romance because I'm not a woman or an elf or something like that. Like I just don't like those restrictions. I
Shots
want to
fired.
bang everybody all the time. Okay.
The solar shade.
Yes.
Well, like
Team
this is
anti-egg
maybe
here. I'm sorry. Sorry, go
this
ahead.
is maybe going like this is definitely related, but it's definitely also like a little rant too, because Mass Effect, for example, in the third game, you actually can romance, I think it's Caden as like a male
Mhm.
chef. And that limitation, not like it not being possible for the first and the second game, makes how it happens in the third so sad. Like it's just like, it's like, oh, it's literally like the end of the world and now it's coming together this way, when like if it had been open from the start, it would just feel different, and the sort of cadence of their relationship would feel so different. um so yeah, I definitely, that might be me arguing for also, like being able to romance everyone, because I'm bi, and so I just kind of feel like I want access to every gender, or a gender, so yeah, I think it's just really important to be intentional from the start,
Mhm.
where possible, because it feels like they wanted to, but I don't know what, there might have been like back end political reasons they couldn't, the climate of the time, but it just ended up affecting how the story felt, when they finally got around to it. So if you can avoid that, you should from the start.
I definitely think that great representation has come out of both. So I certainly don't think that anyone, like, basically, if you are creating, in my opinion, whatever is going to give you feel like the best opportunity, I think, to tell the best story in terms of that character's representation, like, you're going to have to decide that for yourself. But this is Suha speaking, not First Bite, so everyone might feel differently, but that is my personal opinion. So, we have about 5 minutes left, and we had a couple of questions about, like, how to get started writing and that kind of thing. I think that's probably something that we can address on Twitter a little bit more easily. Uh, I won't volunteer anyone from the team, but I will happily talk to anybody who wants to talk about how to get started writing or how to get started with games.
Same.
And we can talk about our Twitters in a minute here, but why don't we go ahead and talk a little bit about what we're working on right now at our studios, and then we can have our special announcement.
Do you
Go
mean
ahead,
like
Anna.
our personal studios?
Personal studios, and then we'll talk about our First Bite stuff.
Oh, did you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we have some exciting news if you have been following the Twitter, which Chris has been doing an amazing job at. We've been putting some spoilery stuff in there, and we are happy to announce that we're working on a DLC for First Bite. So that's super exciting, and we are really
Do you
thrilled
want
that
me
we
to read? Shall I
Yeah.
read our little press
Read-
release?
Chris.
yeah read our
Yeah.
press
Please
release.
do it.
We
Please
will.
do
We
it.
will like after the panel. We will post. Like we have some key art to show you, and we'll post some like fun tweets and more information. But this is our little description. So it's called First Bite, Bad Blood. Shout out Taylor Swift. So you think you're above the law because you're undead and have perfect hair? Think again. In First Bite, Bad Blood, begin your life as a creature of the night and discover that being a vampire isn't just all great sex and free meals. In First Bite, Bad Blood, you'll pick up where you left off as Noe, a freshly turned vampire adjusting to immortality with your new family. But things aren't quite as simple as you'd hoped when you're being eased into vampire life by a murder himbo obsessed with Eurodance, a narcissist with an online shopping addiction, and a wild card with a penchant for BDSM. When very important emails from the Council of Vampires the trio blissfully ignored come back to bite them in the form of an old flame with a thirst for more than just timely file paperwork, you'll need to prove that your existence is justified or prepare to meet your maker for real this time.
Oh,
So yeah, we really wanted to revisit these idiots. So bad. So yeah, we are. What do you?
So
do you guys
thank
want to say
you
anything
for
about
that,
it?
Chris. No, I mean, just I'm very excited. But
Yeah,
we'll
I'm
get into
so
that more
excited.
kind of as we go, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say briefly, it has been a joy being your moderator. If you want to follow what I'm doing, you can find me on Twitter at SusuRocket, SOUSOUROCKET. Yes, it is a Choo Choo Rocket reference. I have a VR game coming soon, Runner, and then I have some other things that I will hopefully announce later as well.
I was going to
Chris?
say, do we want to talk about, like, very briefly talk about the second?
Yes,
Yes,
I'm so
yes.
sorry. Yes,
I
we'll
just
do
didn't
plugs
want to
after.
steal all the thunder. Someone else
gotta
has to
do
talk
it.
Chris,
about
go
the other
ahead,
thing.
please.
I was
Do
going to
it.
say, Dee, do you want to take this one?
No,
Dee.
you do it. No, you have to do it. I'm too excited. You do it.
Okay. So we are excited to announce that, as well as the DLC, which will be coming out in early 2023. We are also making a completely new game. We don't know when it's going to come out yet because we're going to start work on it like after we finish the DLC First Bite. But it's called Killing Boys. If you get the reference, you get the reference. And it is a LGBTQ dark comedy supernatural visual novel where you play as a character called Eve, who is an immortal assassin cursed with the kiss of death, as she turns on her literally evil corporate overlords in an attempt to break free of her ironclad contract, experience betrayal, commit murder, and pursue romance in a story that spans eras. And our tagline is, men may come and go, but murder is forever. and it's going to be really cool, and we're really excited. We haven't like really stuck our teeth into like development yet, but it's coming.
It will be out when it's done. So
What was that, Dee?
We do have something to show, I feel like, at some
Oh
point.
yeah,
right?
so we also have
we're at 1 minute.
we also have some title art that will be going up on Twitter for Killing Boys as well. No character art or anything yet, but just like a very sexy logo that we've had done, which should like give you a really good idea of like the vibe of the game. So yeah, after the panel, if you go over to our Twitter, which is at First Bite Games, and our website where there'll be even more information. And also, if any of you have any artist friends tomorrow, they will definitely want to follow us because we are actively going to be looking for people to help us make Killing Voice. Yay.
Thank you, everybody. Can we get Twitter handles real quick if people want to keep up with you?
Yeah, my Twitter handle's at PeachyEnna.
Mine is at Epistellar, EPISTELLAR.
And mine is at Chris Wrights, I think with an underscore at the end. I can't remember.
If not, we'll put it up on First Bite or something. But thank you guys so much. You've been a joy. I love working with you all. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh.